Okay, so we're going to take a look at how we can help our children who are struggling readers and learners. Fatima, do you want to translate as we're going along or afterwards?
I'll do sort of translation in Jan for the Arabic because most of the delegates are sort of not Arabic speakers, they're English speakers, most of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we start with a learning timeline. When our children are born, they're born with the ability to listen. And so we build up language by building up their listening skills. They learn different sounds, and eventually they start to produce those sounds and speech develops. So everything starts with the listening, followed by listening comprehension. Speech follows the listening, and then storytelling. When they go to school, they start to learn to read. And of course, in primary school, they're learning to read. In secondary school, and towards the end of primary school, they're reading to learn. So reading is a very important skill for learning in school and in general. And this is followed by writing. Children need good spelling, grammar, punctuation, and the ability to structure sentences well, and to structure whatever they want to write with a beginning, middle, and an end. So the writing is very important. And all of this leads to learning. Now, many of the children or students who are struggling, they struggle with one or more of these skills on the learning timeline. So we've got to go right back, and we've got to develop, first of all, we have to develop the cognitive skills or the thinking skills in order to improve everything on that learning timeline. So the program works, Fast Forward works on building up memory, working memory, attention or concentration. It builds processing speed and processing accuracy, and also sequencing skills. Sorry, is there somebody asking me something?
Sorry, could I just ask everyone, please make sure that your microphones is mute because that disturbs the webinar. Please have your microphones on mute. Otherwise, we'll just have to mute it from our side. I think Joyce, darling, can you, is it a thing from your side? Can you mute everyone? Because it seems like someone's got some.
Okay. I think John launched the meeting, so I'll get John to mute.
Yeah.
Just 1 second.
Please, everyone, just a kind request because that disturbs our webinar. We don't want any background noise. If you can just please mute your microphones, please.
Okay, I think everyone's muted now.
Thanks, Joyce.
So we're preparing the brain, the child's brain or the student's brain by developing the memory skills, attention, processing, and sequencing. We start with listening. So if we take a child in a classroom environment, for example, they have to process what the teacher is saying as the teacher is saying it. And many of our children who struggle with listening struggle to process what the teacher is saying. So what does that mean? It means they're not taking in everything the teacher is saying, or they're not getting what the teacher is saying accurately. So we have to build up that processing speed and processing accuracy. So when we build up the processing speed and accuracy, we also have to build up the memory so that the student can absorb what they're processing or what they're hearing or what they're listening to. They can absorb it and remember it. So building up the working memory at the same time as the processing is very important. And then we have to help the child to build up concentration skills so that they can hold the attention for the entire lesson or the whole class or the whole working day, the whole school day. So that concentration and that endurance and that sustained attention. We must work on developing that as well to improve listening skills. Sequencing is very important for listening, so children can follow instructions, for example. If a teacher gives an instruction like, I don't know, maybe children, take out your geography book, open page 10, read page 10, and answer questions 2, 3, and 4 on page 11. Now, that can be a very difficult instruction for a child to take in if he's struggling with any of those cognitive or thinking skills. So he has to take in what the teacher has said, he has to sequence that instruction, he has to remember that it's page 10 he must read, and then he must go to page 11 to pick out the questions 2, 3, and 4 and work on those. So it requires very good cognitive skills to be able to listen in class and to be able to maintain concentration, remember what the teacher is saying, and to follow instructions. So the listening comprehension will follow once we build up those skills. So children, you'll often hear teachers or parents saying to children in class, children, concentrate. But they can't concentrate if they can't take in information accurately, or if they can't remember it. They will lose the concentration. And this leads to poor listening comprehension. So we build up those skills to improve listening comprehension. By the time our children get to the end of primary school, and most certainly in secondary school, 80% of their day is spent listening. Speech follows listening. So for speech, we have to process our thoughts, we have to sequence our thoughts, we have to structure our sentences with a beginning, middle, and an end, and we've got to deliver what we want to say in a fluid way. And we have to use good vocabulary and good pronunciation. Now, if a child's processing or sequencing or working memory is a problem, they very often will not be able to deliver a story well, or deliver it with beginning, middle, and an end. Sometimes children go off point, or they get the wrong end of the stick when they're listening. So their contribution to the conversation may not be correct. So I often give the story about children in a playground when there's background noise, especially in a school playground when there's lots of children and lots of noise, and they're maybe having a chat with their friends, and child number 1 starts talking about what he did at the weekend, child number 2 starts talking about what he did. But if my child is struggling with processing and listening, he's not getting everything that child number 1 says, so he misses a bit of that, and then he misses a bit of what child number 2 says, and the background noise is distracting as well. And then child number 3 starts talking, so he's missing bits. And sometimes then when he contributes, his contribution may be off point. And this can be very upsetting for children. Sometimes they insist on leading the play because they may not have been able to get all the rules that the other children laid out. And so they might get cross, or they might insist that the children play by their rules because they can follow their own rules, because the rules are in their own head, but they can't follow the rules that the others laid out. So sometimes social communications can become a problem, and children might decide they won't play at all, or they go off on their own, or they like being on their own more than they like being with other children playing. So we need good cognitive skills of memory, attention, processing, and sequencing. The children, when they start working on the program, in the first component, they will work on almost 45,000 trials. So it's a very intense exercise every day. They work on a few hundred trials or cues every single time they work on the program. So it's a very intense program, and it's there's a lot of stimulation going on in the brain when the children work, and it's the parts of the brain that are responsible for language and reading and learning that are stimulated and strengthened. So while the children are developing the cognitive skills, their phonemic awareness is also being developed. The phonics, their ability to access the phonics, to get the sounds in language, whether it's English or Arabic or any other language. We're strengthening the brain to get the sounds within language in general, to get sounds. We see that their ability to acquire new vocabulary improves, and their ability to use that vocabulary improves. And of course, their comprehension, they begin to understand more of what they're listening to. And this follows through to the reading later on, and the writing and learning. So, but as it all starts with the cognitive skills or the thinking skills. There are 3 parts to reading. The first part to reading is the decoding. And learning the code can be really difficult. And as you know, there's a very different code in Arabic to the code in English. English is not a transparent language, and it is not really a phonetic language either. So a lot of the rules don't make sense to children learning English. So we must build up their ability to access the code and to learn the code so that they can decode the code, so they can get the sounds at the beginning of words, at the end of words. They can get the middle vowel sounds or the blended sounds. They can break words down into syllables. And so their ability to decode the code begins to improve. Now, comprehension is the second part of reading. And in order to comprehend, while the child is decoding, he has to absorb. So that working memory skill is very important. He has to engage his working memory to absorb what it is that he's decoding and what he's reading in order to understand it and remember it so he can answer questions on it. And this is very important for many of your children who are, in grade 3 or over. They need good reading comprehension skills for maths. It's not just for reading English or reading Arabic. They need it for maths, to read the question and understand the question. The third part to reading is fluency. Now, if a child takes too long to decode a word, it means that that working memory is not engaging. And so parents often say to us, he read the word, he sounded it out, it took him ages, and he got it. But if it takes longer than 6 seconds, 5 or 6 seconds to decode a word, the child then is not engaging the working memory. And so very often they might see the exact same word 2 sentences later or in the next paragraph, and it's like they've never seen it before, because while they actually sounded out the word and they got the word, they weren't engaging that working memory to absorb the meaning of the word. So what exactly do we need to do in order to match a word to a picture in our head that word represents? So if we take this word cat, the child is sounding it out. So he needs to decode it, and he needs to be able to visually process it by looking at the letters on the page, looking at the word. He's got to phonologically process it. It begins with k, and the middle sound is a, and the end sound is t. Now, any of us who are fluent readers, we just read the word cat. But for a struggling reader, it may not be so easy, because he has to engage his visual processing, his phonological processing, and he's got to do it quickly. And he's to engage the memory in order to match that word, that written word, to a picture in his head of a cat. Okay, now this is the beginning of comprehension, decoding the word, but building up the speed of that decoding or that fluency is crucial for comprehension. And the parts of the brain, while we have a picture here of the brain, while the child is working on the exercises in the program, this part of the brain, this is the part of the brain here that is being stimulated through the exercises and the frequency of the work. and the specialized nature of the exercises. If you want to take a look at the demos, here you will find access to the demos. So it's, I'm sure Fatima will provide you with this information afterwards as well. So our young children start with Foundations 1. So those are the children between 6 and 12 years of age, usually the children in primary school. And then our secondary school children start with Elements 1. And they start with these components to build up the cognitive skills, but later they move on to reading components and fluency components. Each exercise, there is a purpose behind each exercise. So the younger children will start with exercises that will develop the memory, attention, processing, and sequencing, but also things like the English grammar, word structure, and knowledge. It's building up the listening comprehension all the time. It's building up phonological awareness. So there a lot of skills are being developed simultaneously through each of the exercises for both the younger kids and the secondary school children. Private students, so if parents purchase the program for their children, we provide them with weekly reports. If schools take it on, then the schools themselves will have access to the reports. So these reports show us how the children are progressing. If the children need help, we can't give them the answers, but we can provide interventions that can help you help the children. The reports show us how they're progressing, but also what their attendance is like, what their participation is like, what kind of mistakes they're making. So they're very comprehensive reports, and they go out on Saturdays or on Sundays every week. Now, to be a success, we must work at success. So the protocol is 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. And fidelity to the protocol is very, very important. What's happening in the brain is the brain is being stimulated by the frequency of the exercise, the specialized nature of the exercise, and the intensity of the work. And the neurons in the brain begin to fire. And those neurons begin to make new connections with each other and form new pathways. And it's those pathways that we want to strengthen. And the exercises strengthen those pathways and make them stronger and stronger. And our research shows us that if children or students adhere to the protocol of 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, that we can see improvements of up to 2 years in up to 40 or 60 hours work. So the children must work no less than 3 days, okay? For maximum benefits, it's 3 to 5 days a week. So for writing is like speech in many ways. Children have to process their thoughts, they have to sequence their thoughts, they have to structure their sentences with the beginning, middle, and an end. But now they have to think of the spelling, the grammar, and the punctuation. And all of this takes time. And if their cognitive skills or their thinking skills aren't as good as they should be, it means that writing can be very difficult. Learning spellings can be very difficult. And often parents will come to us or teachers and say, he's just struggling with his reading and his spelling. But there's a lot more to building up spelling, and good writing skills than just improving reading. We have to get right in there and strengthen the brain's ability, those thinking skills, those cognitive skills of memory, attention, processing, and sequencing to improve a child's ability to access the spellings and then learn the spellings and then remember the spellings. And it's not just for Friday test or the weekly spelling test that they need the spellings for. They need it for later on, 2 weeks later. Do your children still remember their spellings or have they forgotten them? And so we need to build the skills so they can absorb the spellings, learn them, remember them, transfer them to the short-term memory and to the long-term memory. It's the same with grammar. Grammar needs very good processing. It needs good sequencing. So for example, for prepositions or for suffixes or prefixes, you know, those bits we add on to the end of words or the beginning of words, like ed at the end of walked changes the meaning of walk. Ing at the end of a word like walk changes the meaning again. So, but it takes good processing to understand that. It takes good sequencing to understand that. Some of our children don't even register endings when they're reading. They just read the root word because they're not sequencing the whole word properly and they're not processing the whole word properly. So writing, we need good thinking skills for writing, and we need good grammar, punctuation, and spelling. So the program works on all of this. And if I'll just give an example of how good punctuation or how a simple comma can affect the meaning of a sentence. If you take a sentence like this, the bear eats shoots and leaves, he's eating shoots and leaves. But if we put a comma after eats, it changes the meaning of that sentence completely. It means the bear eats and then he shoots something and then he leaves. So punctuation, grammar, spellings are all very important. And it slows, if a child has to think about how to spell a word, how to, what punctuation he has to use, what grammar he has to use, if he's slow at that, it means it's going to slow down his writing, and his speed of writing can be affected, and his accuracy of writing can be affected. In secondary school, many of our children, they are listening, but also they have to take notes while they're listening. And if they're not getting everything that's being said as it's being said, if they're not remembering it all, they're not going to be able to summarize it and write notes. So that note taking can be really difficult in secondary school for children. So our goal is to work on building up the cognitive skills, the thinking skills, to improve the listening comprehension, build up good speech, good storytelling, verbal storytelling, and good reading comprehension, and good writing and learning. But also we see children's social communications and social negotiations improve because they're able to think faster. And so we see very often that children's confidence and self-esteem begins to improve as well. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing now. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me.
Okay, so thank you so much, Joyce. That was a very amazing information. So everyone, hope you enjoyed it. Just any questions that you have, you can put on the chat box, or you could just ask. So we've got one, Fariha, isn't it? Am I saying your name right?
Yes, you are. Hi, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. So fire off. What question do you have?
I just have one question regarding it is about reading. Now, I have students. I'm a teacher here in Dubai. I work at a British curriculum school, and I have many students who come from non-English speaking households. Now, I'm a year one teacher. As a teacher, when we try to enforce reading, although we have been practicing sounds, if there is no reinforcement, how shall we help those students bridge the gap and work on reading and sounding and blending CVC, CVCE words generally?
Okay, so can you, what do you mean? How can you reinforce the words or the sounds, or?
No, my point is, because as a teacher, I face this, it's I will not term it a problem, but it's something that I face because there's no reinforcement at home. And I would
Okay.
want those students to, move forward in reading. But because
Okay.
they, yeah.
So it's a language reading based program. Okay. So the children, even if they don't do any practice at home,
Mm.
if they work 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, in each session, they will respond to, you know, some children will respond to 300-400 trials or 300 or 400 questions in a 30-minute session. So it's a very intense program. Now there's stepping stones. So it starts at the beginning with building up their ability to differentiate between sounds. So sounds like ba da, be day, those sort of sounds that sound very alike but aren't the same. They'll work on listening comprehension exercises. So for example, exercises like touch green circle. And that starts off really easy, but then it becomes much more difficult. And they'll work on exercises like, or they'll work on an instruction like, with a small green circle, touch the large blue square. And you may ask, well, what has that got to do with reading? So what it's doing is it's building up the thinking skills, preparing the child for accessing, reading, decoding the sounds, getting the sounds at the beginning of words, getting the sounds at the end of words, the middle vowel sounds. And they'll be doing this every day for 30 minutes. And then when we've built up the cognitive skills and the listening skills, and to learn from you as a teacher, they have to be able to listen to you and understand what you're teaching them and remember it. And then we go on to the reading components. So every day they work on the reading components. They're reading, or depending on the age, like your year one children now would be, they'd be 7.
Age bracket.
Yeah, 5, 6, 7 years, 5, 6 years of age. So we wouldn't recommend the program for under 6s, okay? So children 6 and over are ideal for it, but not under 6, because we find that they need too much supervision and it's just that little bit too difficult for them. So 6 years of age and over. And so that age will
challenge them at an early age.
Pardon?
Wouldn't it be good to challenge them at an early age, you know, considering most of them?
Yes, it does, but they're just not able for it, you know, and the benefits we find, in my experience, the benefits are greater by waiting for this particular program, you know. Yeah, so the younger ones will start with, you know, matching the sounds to the symbols of the alphabet, working on initial consonant sounds, blended sounds, vowel sounds, all of that. The older children will work on reading comprehension, spellings, grammar, punctuation, and the reading components are age appropriate. And then later on, they'll work on a component to develop their fluency, you know, to bridge that, to help them speed up their level of reading. So they read, they're recorded, and we can see how many words correct per minute they can read. But that's way down the line. We have to start with the thinking skills. We then move on to the reading skills and then move on to the fluency skills. So if they were to do no reading at home, they would be responding. They have to engage their brain to respond to 300-400 trials every single day for half an hour. So it's they generally wouldn't need any more input than that. And what you'll find is that they'll start to read themselves, you know, they may not need paired reading at home. And the fluency component is paired reading. So they're recorded, they're corrected if they mispronounce or misread a word, their vocabulary is built up, you know, so it's a very, very comprehensive program.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We've got some questions for Joyce. I'm just going to read. We've got a child doesn't understand that. Muhammad Sadiq says, if a child doesn't understand the abstract things, what strategies should we employ to make him understand?
Okay, so not being able to get the abstract or the nuances or the inferences in language can be down to a processing speed thing again, all right? So when, you know, you'd often hear parents or teachers saying, he doesn't get it, he's not reading between the lines. Sometimes you know, you may be asked a question and the answer isn't in the text. So for example, let's say a child goes out playing with his friends and he comes back in having had a great time and all the rest of it. And the story is all about that, but it doesn't say anything about how he's feeling. And one of the questions is, how do you think the boy is feeling? You know, these think about or abstract questions. It is reasonable to assume from what happened in the story that the boy is happy. But some kids can't make that link. They can't get the abstract, or sometimes they may not be able to get the jokes or the inferences. Because to do that, we've got to be one step ahead of the speaker when we're listening. Children who are struggling with listening are usually 1 or 2 steps behind the speaker. They're catching up all the time. And so to get the abstract, we have to build up the speed of processing. We've got to build up that processing accuracy as well, and engage the working memory so that he can remember the nuances of the story and then make assumptions, you know. And that's a very important skill for getting the abstract in language.
Thank you so much, Joyce. We've got another question. Can you name a few exercises to be given to increase cognitive skills?
Well, I could name all of the exercises in our program. That's what the program does, you know. So in the first, that's exactly what the program does. So all of the exercises in our program work on the cognitive skills and simultaneously work on listening and reading skills as well. So it works on all of the cognitive skills.
Yeah, so just the program, the Fast Forward program, that once you purchase that, it's got many exercises, lots of reinforcement for children, and it caters for everyone, as we've mentioned in our post. That it caters for EAL children, English Additional Language, SEN children as well. So there's many exercises and many, you know, that the children can practice. And as Joyce was mentioning, sometimes most of them don't even need like parents if they do that 30 minutes every day. Another question we've got, Joyce, is, so I just have one question. How do you attract children to explore the reading if they're not interested?
Children are usually not interested in reading because they're struggling with one or more of the cognitive skills. By building up the cognitive skills, we see an improvement in children's desire to read. You know, it's, you know, if you can't do something well and it's hard work and it doesn't make sense and you're not remembering what it is that you're reading or whatever, you lose interest, you lose concentration. If you're not understanding what you're reading, what's the point? You know, if you're not getting the story, you can't disappear. The joy of reading is disappearing into a story. If you're reading a novel, for example, you disappear into the story and time passes and you enjoy the story. But if you're reading and it's just words on the page and you're not understanding it, not remembering it, there's no pleasure in it because you're not getting the story, you know? So by building up the cognitive skills, we see that children's desire to read it improves, you know, because they can do it and they can understand it and they can enjoy it, you know. One thing you said there, Fatima, children, if they work on the program, that is a lot of practice, but they do have to be supervised, you know. I wouldn't, for example, primary school children, I would not send them to their bedroom to work on the program on their own. They need to be an adult needs to make sure that they're engaging with the exercises, check the reports every week that go out to them, or in a school environment, the teachers need to check the reports on the website. You know, so there is that supervision required for children working on the program. In a school, a teacher can supervise up to 5 children at a time.
Absolutely, yes, true. And then we've got one she's asking Fatima Hassan, it's how can we work on spellings? My daughter is in GEMS Legacy School, but she has difficulties in remembering the spelling for the test and learns well. But after that, if I ask her after 2 days, she forgets.
Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, you know, you can practice spelling, but unless we build up that working memory, and a lot of us with struggling children, you know, I remember my own children when they were learning spellings, I always hoped that the spelling test would be first thing on the Friday morning because they had the spellings fresh in their heads and we were practicing the whole way in the car, into school. And if the test didn't happen until 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the chances were that they'd get a few spellings wrong, you know. So you need good cognitive skills to build up the spellings. You need to be able to process the sounds. You need good phonemic awareness. You need good decoding. You need good working memory to remember them. You need good sequencing, which sound comes first, which sound comes last, you know. So there's a lot going on in order to access spellings, learn them. But then once you learn them for the Friday test, we must transfer them from our working memory to the short-term memory, the long-term memory, okay? So that 2 weeks later, they can remember the spelling. And we see that the writing improves because the speed of thought, the speed of retrieving that word and knowing how to spell it, that improves. Same with the grammar and the punctuation.
Thank you so much, Joyce. Another question is about SEN. Is saying, I have a question in case for special needs learners. Let's talk of for autistic and special speech delay. How can the style be modified to favor them? So what does basically fast forward do?
So the program is suitable for children with language delay or disorder. It is also suitable, like we would get a lot of referrals from speech and language therapists and audiologists for language development. And for autism, children on the autistic spectrum, you know, results, we need to be realistic about our expectations. It depends where on that spectrum the child comes, right? So we have worked with children, for example, who are non-verbal, and they begin to speak and they begin to form sentences with a beginning, middle, and an end. Can I guarantee that if your child is non-verbal that will happen? No, but we've had successes like that, okay? As we go further up the autistic spectrum, obviously we get better results, okay? So children with, for example, Asperger's, you know, their processing, auditory processing is one of the core issues with autism. And we see these children, their communication skills begin to improve. Very often with autism, children's communication, social interactions are a problem. One of your listeners mentioned getting the abstract. Very often children with autism don't get the abstract. They don't get the nuances or the inferences in language, and that's a processing thing. It's a speed of processing. You know, they might take things literally and they get upset because they don't get the nuance or they don't get the joke or they don't get the sarcasm. And that's a common trait with autism. So we see that by improving their auditory processing skills, by building up the memory and the concentration, we see that socially they begin to improve. And they begin to, does it take away the autism? No, it doesn't, but it improves. Very often our children, you know, some children with autism, the symptoms are different for every child is different, whether it's autism or dyslexia or any other learning difficulty. The one autistic child is not the same as a second child with autism, but there are some common traits. But one of the core issues with all children with autism is working auditory processing, and the program targets that and develops that.
Thank you so much, Joyce. We'll have, I know so a lot of you have a lot of questions, but we've got literally just a few minutes and then I bet Joyce is tired. So thank you so much. So one more question will, how should we work on spelling? My child's in first grade. He's outstanding in his studies. When it comes to spelling, he's unable to remember those. We've already answered this one just now. For comprehension passages, the strategy of first read the question, find a keyword, and then looking for the answer in the passage is good, or there are other methods also?
Yeah, and as I said earlier with the comprehension, it's the fluency, but it's the think about it questions or the abstract questions, that strategy, which is a good strategy, read it, find a keyword, and you know, find your answer that way. But if the answer isn't in the text, it's a problem, you know. And also with maths questions, sometimes they can be difficult to comprehend, to carry out the correct the correct calculation to get the correct answer. So the comprehension, if a child is doing well, he's only in first grade, right? Or first year one. If the comprehension is a problem now, it'll probably become a bigger problem as he gets older, because from about 8.5, 9 years of age, the text in class, there's a shift in the curriculum and the text gets more difficult, it gets denser. There's a shift from listening to the teacher, from having visual props by the teacher uses visual props, and he moves very much to more of an auditory experience. So we find that children who are struggling with comprehension in grade 1, and very often that can get worse as they get older, because the reading becomes more complicated. There are fewer compensation strategies, visual compensation strategies, like looking at the pictures to understand what the story is about, you know. And that strategy is a good one for comprehension, but it doesn't always work, as I say, when we're think about questions.
Thank you so much, Joyce. And the last question will be about writing. So I'm just going to summarize, because they're all asking sort of the similar questions about writing. They're saying, when a child struggles in writing, struggling in what, for example, writing paragraphs, writing letters, like, what do we do to help them out? And how does our program, Fast Forward program, how would it help those children that are struggling with writing?
Yeah, so you'll have noticed that at the end of the learning timeline came the writing bit. Again, for writing, a child has to process his thoughts, he has to sequence those thoughts, he has to structure his sentences with a beginning, middle, and an end, he has to think of the words he wants to use, he's got to think of the spellings, he's got to think of the grammar, the punctuation. And usually in class, in an exam, for example, he's only given a certain amount of time to do that writing. There's an awful lot going on there for a struggling child for that to happen automatically. And usually for struggling learners, it doesn't happen automatically. So unfortunately, we have to start right at the beginning, you know, and that's why I start with the listening. We have to build up the listening skills so that he can get the sounds and the phonemic awareness to improve the spellings, to improve the grammar. We have to build up the speech so that he can structure a story, the beginning, middle, and an end. But then he can write the story, the beginning, middle, and an end. So there's an awful lot going on to structure a story. And parents often say to us, you know, if I ask him the question, he can answer it, but he can't put it down on paper. Very often there's a lot going on between having it in your head and getting it down on the page, you know. So we have to build up those cognitive skills in order to bridge the gap between having the information in his head and getting it down on paper with the correct spellings, grammar, and punctuation, you know.
Okay, thank you so much, Joyce. I think that's all the questions. Thank you so much for this amazing webinar. Any sort of feedback? We would love your feedback in the chat box. If you can put some comments of how the constructive feedback, please, everyone, for Joyce, because thank you so much. It was amazing. And if you have any questions in regards to our program, Fast Forward program, you can we're going to email you sort of asking feedback as well. But however, I would really appreciate it if we can put it in the chat box, all your feedback. And for the maths, someone asked about maths. We are going to have for mathematics a webinar as well, hopefully in Jan or Feb. We just and I will sort of announce it on the UA Teachers Network group. Okay, so please, can you jot your feedback? Thank you so much, Joyce and John. That was amazing. We are going to do more sort of webinars. For the ones that didn't, of course, you're all going to get your certificates and the recording as well. But please, we're going to keep it on just for you to write your feedback. Okay. So do you want to say something as well, Joyce?
I just wanted to say thank you very much, and thank you all for taking interest in the program and interest in learning more about what we can do to help our children when they're struggling learners or English language learners.
Thank you so much, Joyce. Please put some detailed feedback. Not just thank you, just some feedback for us. Just how was the webinar? What would you like more? What was good about it? We would really appreciate that. It helps us, however many years of experience we have as educational trainers, we're still learning. Thank you. I can see some feedback. Thank you so much. Okay, so goodbye from us. We're going to keep on just for the chat so everyone can write their feedback, and hopefully see you for our next webinar, everyone. Take care of yourselves. And
Thank you very much.
everyone. Thank you, Joyce and John and everyone. See you next time.
Thank you.
See you
Take
next
care.
time,
Bye.
Fatima. You take care. Bye for now.
Thank you. Have a lovely weekend, everyone. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.